When George and I and the children were in Africa, he had a friend who always, they were good buddies, and he was very helpful. George would help people. As a pilot, Africa, there were very few roads. And so this man needed something. George flew all these barrels into the interior. And but anyway, this missionary arrived from the United States and was going down to her mission station in the bush. It was an orphanage in the bush. Well, the man's wife was further in the bush teaching a Bible study and was not home. So this woman couldn't stay in his house. So George said, no problem. We got a guest room. Mary can come and stay in our house until you get back, until your wife gets back. So anyway, Mary came and stayed in our house. She was, when you first arrive in the bush, in Africa, and you're going to live in the bush, you don't know anything of the capital city, but you need to, because you'll have to go to the dentist, you'll have to see the doctor, everybody. So anyway, I took her around in my little Volkswagen while our kids were in school, and I showed her where everything was and what she needed to buy if she needed to purchase certain things. So I kind of showed her around. So we're sitting in our living room one day and the children at school, and out of the blue, Mary says to me, Maggie, have you ever considered the baptism of the Holy Spirit? Well, I tell you what, I bit the inside of my lip because I thought, yeah, right after street walking. I went to nursing school in Springfield, Missouri, where the headquarters of the Assembly of God was. And those people were weird, I thought. I had a couple of friends who their parents were with this group. Well, anyway, I said no. And she said, well, when my barrel's coming, oh Lord, here's the Bible thumper. When my barrels come, I'll send them up to you. I got a couple of books I want you to read about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Well, true to her word, she did. George arrived with them in his hand. One of them was by Don Basham, who was a Disciples of Christ minister. Well, I was raised in the Disciples of Christ church, and I knew they weren't weird, way out people. And then there was another book, and it was by somebody that wrote for Guidepost magazine, and they speak with other tongues. It was the name of the book. Okay, I read them. Okay. Well, then the capital city had bookstores, and Liberia was an English-speaking country for if you needed to go to school or you needed to go work for government or get help from the government. We all spoke English. So I got to read. It just was a lot of people were stories about people who got the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And I thought, wow, this is weird. Well, but I kept reading more, and then it said that, it was a good experience, but, it's good if your husband and wife were in cohesion on this subject, because it can be very divisive. So after a while I said, okay, God, I believe this is a real experience, but don't you dare lay that on me unless you lay it on George. And so I guess I do believe it is a real experience. So we did go back to the States. Everywhere we went, people have been baptized in the Holy Spirit. This is in 1971. Mm-hmm. Well, it was the beginning of the charismatic movement. And I thought, wow, my cousin and her husband had been baptized in the Holy Spirit. They were disciples of Christ. No matter where we went, people were talking about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So, George was traveling for our ministry. He was in the East Coast, and with my sister and brother-in-law, where she was in a Bible study, and she was not charismatic. But guess what? The woman that teaching the Bible study sure was. And so here, this woman started teaching, and somebody started speaking in tongues. And George was a very intelligent man, and he could fake languages really good. And he was a funny man. Tell a story. When we were in Capital City, we had a lady that took care of our kids when we were gone, so that she'd put the children to bed, thought they were sleeping. Scott they faked it. Kim was 3 and Scott was 4, and Yama had a headache and put them to bed, thought they were asleep. She sat down in the living room and went to sleep because she had such a bad headache. Scott got George's shears, electric. Oh yeah. We drove up, came in, and there was our kid, shaved head with a shaved. Well, he said, I cut Kim's hair. She had beautiful blonde hair. I went and looked at her. I couldn't see anything different. But he had just started to shave her underneath. He went to school the next day with it. George just shaved his head off because it was all botchy. The teacher said to him, Scott, what happened to your hair? Well, my dad cut it. Well, why did your dad cut it like that? Well, I have a very funny daddy, he said.
So, did George receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit?
Yes, he did. So he's in the East Coast, and I'm in the Midwest, and I'm reading Kenneth Hagin's book on how to receive the baptism. He's there with this group, and this woman, somebody starts to speak in tongues, and George thought, oh, I know what they're saying, but he thought, I probably am faking it. I probably don't, not really. Well, the woman that was teaching was a very special lady. She said, now, are we finished here, or do we need something more? George said, no, we're not finished. And she said, well, what do we need? I think you're supposed to lay hands on me. So she placed her hands on his shoulder. And he received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Came home. We were 1,500 miles apart. God was faithful. He didn't give me something I didn't want or get, And we received the baptism of the Holy Spirit together. And it made such a difference in our lives. A friend of ours, father was an Assembly of God pastor. And we went out to dinner with this man and his wife. They were good friends of ours. And he said, before I received the baptism in the Holy Spirit, when I went to witness, I felt like I opened my mouth and rocks fell out. I thought, boy, I know how he feels. But you know, we did. We received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. It changed our lives. Changed our lives. You know, I thank God for Cornerstone Church. Do you know, when Pastor Catherine, the last time that we were together, Cat, she said that George came to her and to Pastor Darryl. He had been diagnosed with melanoma and he knew he was going to go home to heaven soon. And he told her, he said, I want Maggie in a good, solid church, and that I can really depend on. And she said, Pastor Darryl, and she said, we'll be that to Maggie. And so Cornerstone has been that to us. But the baptism of the Holy Spirit has been the thing that's changed my life. I would not have missed that for anything on the planet, because, you know, it says when you receive that, it's out of your innermost spirit flows rivers of living water. And I'm so grateful for that living water, because it has changed my life dramatically.